Welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions about AV 7 days a week. What do we have, Guy?
First question is coming in from Tony Mobley in Noonan, and he's asking, is the M1 iPad Pro, does it have a Thunderbolt connection and not USB-C? I'm asking because certain adapters don't connect to my ATEM Mini Pro.
Mr. Lindsay.
Hey, and I can run with this too.
Go for it.
It's USB-C only. So if you're trying to connect Thunderbolt to it, it's odd that a lot of the Apple devices are Thunderbolt, and then the iPads are USB-C, but the iPads and the phones are actually USB-C. Let's go ahead and jump into the next question.
Next one's coming in from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas, and he asks, Lux Optics Kino is $20, no subscription required. Yes, and it's the Apple app of the year. Compare Kino to Filmic Pro and Blackmagic camera app for show price, features, and utility, and he's got a link there to showwithkino.com.
Yeah, so it's kind of between, I don't know who's used, it's funny, Filmic Pro was the thing, and then it got bought and went to a pretty heavy subscription, and then no one talked about it anymore. So it kind of disappeared. I'm not sure. I don't even know if they still make it. So anyway, they let go of most of the team, I think. So Kino sits kind of, in my opinion, halfway between the Apple's own photo app and Blackmagic's. Blackmagic is much more complicated and heavy, but it has a lot more features. Where Kino it's a little bit more streamlined, and I have it. I admit that I usually am using the Apple camera or the Blackmagic camera is like, okay, I'm serious, and the Blackmagic one is I'm taking pictures of my kids, and the Kino one is halfway in between. But I think for a lot of people who find the Blackmagic, even though the Blackmagic camera is free, they may find that camera to be daunting to use. There's a lot of features, and you can make a lot of the wrong settings. Ask me how I know. So, but you do get a lot of power, and you get access to almost everything that the camera will do. But Kino is written by the folks that made Halide, and it is they really understand what they're doing. And $20 one time is a great deal. And but it's a little bit more. My experience so far has been it's a little bit more streamlined than the Blackmagic one. It gives you a lot more features than the Apple camera. And again, a lot of us aren't comparing to Filmic because I don't know anybody that's using it anymore. so that kind of the timing of Filmic going to subscription and the Blackmagic camera coming out was probably pretty devastating. There was suddenly an option that solved that problem at the same time that they were doing something that made everybody upset. And sometimes you don't see that kind of happen. That you don't see that timing work so closely often. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles, California, and he asks, what aftermarket battery do you recommend for Sony cameras, or do you just recommend picking up a Sony-branded battery?
Wouldn't it be great if Sony had one battery? So look at the question I had when I read this was, which one? Which one of the 80 different batteries that Sony makes for their cameras? Go ahead, Jesse.
We only do aftermarket for LPE6s for the Blackmagic pockets. Everything else is branded.
Yeah, and so I for the old 970s that a lot of us use with some of the older cameras, I'm using the small rig because it has a USB-C. I think I have one sitting around here somewhere. Oh, here it is. So these are the old ones, and these are still used in things like a lot of the sound devices, stuff like that. But I have to admit, having a USB-C on the end of this, I'm really good at managing USB-C chargers and not as good at carrying around blocks that I have to use to charge my batteries. And so I found this to be really useful. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it depends on what model Sony camera too. If it's like an FX6, FX9, there's intelligence in those Sony branded batteries, so I would stick with those ones. If it's something that you're going to be doing like a dock with a big rig where you can go ahead and slap on a plate on the back from like Shape. I have a Shape where I can throw my core batteries. So I have a ton of core V-mount batteries, and then I got DTAP off that as well. So, and there were some really awesome ones that clicked together that came out at NAB that when we visited their booth that they were showing off, that I wanted a ton of those just because you can fly with them. Whereas some of the ones that I have, you can't fly with, they're just too big. So it just depends on the model of camera. Some of the smaller ones, they don't take up much power, and they don't require that intelligence. So you can use those cheap, $20 batteries that you can get off Amazon and buy a bunch of them and But it's kind of hit or miss, you know. If the shoot really matters, then I would use the genuine Sony batteries.
Next question.
Next one's coming in from Tony Mobley, and he asks, I'm speaking in House of Worship service this Sunday. I saw a YouTube video by another pastor that I would like to share at the end of my sermon. Would it be a strike on YouTube if I were to include the inspirational YouTube for House of Worship YouTube channel?
Go ahead, Jonas.
It could. And once again, in theory, like there's laws. That is the one perspective that you have to consider. And then there's also what YouTube does and what that person does. I personally would test it if it happens. Most of the time, you wouldn't get a strike. You might be claimed. If you, in this specific case, if it's a DMCA takedown request, you also have the option to cut it out. So at that point, you can say, you know what, after the fact, we cut that part out and your video would still live. I think it's unlikely that you would get a community strike. That would prevent you from doing more. You probably would get a copyright claim, and then you have the option of them getting all the money that your church makes off that video, which I know my church content probably isn't that much. Or you get the option to cut it out, or nothing will happen. I think the likeliness of that affecting your channel is relatively low.
Go ahead, Jason.
Jonas covered most of it. Test, absolutely test. Set up an unlisted live broadcast and play that sermon through it, and that will tell you, probably not 100%, but relatively certainly, whether or not you're at the risk of any sort of ramification. I think you'd be okay.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I would think about the in-house audience first and really examine whether or not a YouTube video needs to be played in the middle of a sermon. I haven't been in a sermon where a YouTube video added anything. It might be more appropriate to send that out in the weekly newsletter.
Next question.
Next one's from Funsock Dorji, and they ask, hi, should I go for the MD-LX bidirectional or BMD's bidirectional? Suggestions?
Jonas?
There's a couple differences. One, the MD-LX. One important thing is people often say decimator when they mean...
Can you describe what the MD-LX is?
Yes. So the MD-LX is a decimator from decimator, but most of the time when you hear people say decimator, what they mean is an MH or one of those other converters that is like multifaceted, can do a lot of things. The Demon Quad, the MDHX, and then there's the lower one that is the MD-LX. It's a bidirectional SDI or HDMI to SDI converter. One important thing to keep in mind with the Blackmagic ones is it's about half the cost. So if you're in an environment where you have to replace equipment often, that might be an advantage. One downside with the bidirectional specifically is you can't lock it to a specific mode. There's like auto on the MD-LX, it's auto. You have 4 modes to select. You can do auto, where like it goes from whatever active input is, it goes to all the outputs. So if SDI is active, it goes to HDMI and the SDI out. You can set it where HDMI goes to SDI out and SDI in goes to HDMI. You can set it where SDI in goes to HDMI and SDI, and you can set it where HDMI goes to HDMI out and SDI out. With the Blackmagic one thing to keep in mind is if you take the HDMI in, it will come out the HDMI out until you plug in an SDI cable, and sometimes they flip. You can't set it in the firmware currently that you want it to be specifically one way or another. So that is one common issue that we see with those. And if it's not somewhere where you can easily reach it, I would get the MD-LX. It's a little more expensive, but it's going to get rid of a bunch of small little problems that you sometimes have with the Blackmagic ones. A common one is that you'll see on one line, there's like a 1 to 2 pixel offset, either at the top or on the left, of just a green line or a black line. that often then just means you need to power cycle them. One other advantage of the MDLX is that you can convert between level A and B. Blackmagic kind of also can do that, but I've seen their level A be weird enough that encoders can't deal with it. So yeah, but most likely if you need it quickly, you're going to end up with the Blackmagic ones, because I just checked. If I want to buy an MDLX, I can't buy it till February 2025.
Next question.
Next one's coming in from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. And he asks, what impact might the gain or loss of the 6 gigahertz spectrum have on your productions? Is the move to low-power devices good for your work? And he's got a link there to tvtechnology.com.
Go, Jason.
I looked at this article, but as a rule, I don't use anything Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi adjacent in production. As far as my work with regards to IT, the 6E, Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 will be awesome, and they're a long way from here.
Yeah, I mean,
7 is.
The real challenge by opening this up is really that it could affect microwave transmissions, a lot of point-to-point stuff that a lot of us do. So most likely FCC will once again cut us off at the knees, as production folks, because they don't care. So I think that's the biggest problem, is that they keep on, going, okay, we really want all these consumer things and cell phones and everything else. All of our cell phone, I don't know if your calls are getting better than mine, but my calls just keep getting worse. So most of our connections, because we keep on trying to divvy this up into smaller and smaller pieces, is working less and less well. And so I think that's the biggest impact it'll have on us. Things will stop working as well as they have been not working very well now. So I think that's the biggest challenge. Next question.
Next one in from Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. And he asks, besides a clacker board, at the beginning of the recording, what are some good ways to sync up audio and video using Final Cut?
Go, Jonas.
Most of the time, you also have some automatic alignments. What I like to make sure when I record multi-channel podcasts or recordings is that I have one that is maxed, so that I have one channel that is all of the audio and likely a gallery feed. That way, that is your synced source, and then you can sync everything to that. I find it relatively easy to then go in and roughly match it with the frames. And then you can also look really closely at the waveforms, and most of the time you can also match it with that then.
Go, Jesse.
Just make sure at the recording stage that your BCD cameras are set to the onboard microphone and not set to an XLR input that you don't have an XLR plugged into, because then you'll just have a silent track. If you end up doing this, what you can do is use the blinks. Like if you've got multiple cameras of somebody and you catch the blink, you can sync it up to when their eye is closed and get across the finish line that way.
Good, Chris.
First of all, I want to apologize if I break up. I think I'm having internet problems today. Zach, don't underestimate the importance of having scratch audio on the video file. I think a lot of times, not in small productions, because cameras sort of by default just record audio, but in more high-level productions, the audio department sometimes they won't bother sending audio to the camera itself. They'll have the outboard, fancy audio recorder guy, and they should send audio to the camera as well. I will tell you, practically speaking, most of the time when they send audio to both places, most of the time, I use the audio that's in the camera file.
Yeah, I think many of us have had so many different ways of syncing up cameras that we're all over the place, and it depends on how long the piece is as well. Because the longer it gets, the more certain things will start to fall apart, and what you're looking at. As Mickey said, LTC is kind of an industry standard, and a lot of people use it. But sometimes we get into a situation where we don't have it, or a lot of us started without it. So as we started without it, to Chris's point, I think that most of us who have spent years syncing everything with the audio channels can do it very, very fast, like to a point where, but the problem you get into is the reason that folks from film don't like that is because once you have 1,000 little pieces, it's a disaster. Like it is So when Chris and I are talking about, we'll sync it up. Okay, well, if I've got a 2-hour piece that all the cameras are connected, I have a couple sync points and I'm fine. If I'm doing one shot at a time with notes and different takes and things that are on my field recorder versus things on the camera, that's when timecode is super useful. And you really want to think about. So you just want to think about what you're timing together. But if what you're talking about, yeah, you were going to say something, Chris.
I was also going to say, a lot of times in the field, you'll find one person, on the camera department who edited a video once and they think they understand post-production. First of all, break their arm and send them off the set. But a lot of times what happens is and I've had this happen and it just kills me. They'll go, oh, the audio files they're small. Just hit record and let it run all day. And then they go start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. And those people, I literally want to hunt them down and kill them. But
so violent this morning, Chris.
Sorry, you asked me to come back, Alex. This is what you get. You get the whole thing. The bull and the horns. But a lot of times the syncing issues have to do with bad practices on the set.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times when we try to train people, I try to have them do lots and lots of posts before they actually create files so that they understand what they need. Like when people came into PixelCore, the first thing you did was mostly organize the files and do things like that, because I want you to see what we have to deal with on the other end, if it works or if it doesn't work. And then you also, when you get to the set, you get to realize why we didn't do some of those things. I was talking to someone about fix it in, why, they were like, fix it in post. Why don't we fix it on set? And I get that. But there's also, I used to have this little ticker. I've talked about this in the past. I used to have a little thing at the end of at the bottom of my spreadsheet that told me how much this production is costing me per minute. I just want to know what that per minute is really important, because I would do what we used to call burning the train, which is that, Pennsylvania Railroad. I'll give you a little history lesson here on Friday. Pennsylvania Railroad, they had a problem where train would break down. Train would stop up the tracks. They have to send an engineer out. They have to fix the train. Then they get the train 3 days that the tracks are not being used, and they're not getting paid for those days. When Andrew Carnegie was an assistant to the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, someone sent in a telegraph that said, "This train's down on this thing," and he just sent back a telegraph that said, "Burn the train. Just push it off the side." And they were like, "What?" the telegraph that came back said, "I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood your telegraph. It said burn the train." And he said, just get it off the tracks and just keep moving. It costs more to keep the tracks closed than just throwing the train to the side and having a new one. And that became the way that the Pennsylvania Railroad worked, and then the way a lot of railroads worked. If the train broke down, they just burned it, threw it off to the side, and kept going. So we call it in production, we call burning the train, is like there's something that you think will be better to do, but it's actually cheaper to go buy another printer, go to Guitar Center and buy Mogami cables, go to, and when you know how much it's costing you per hour or per minute, it's very quickly you go, oh, well, buying 2 Mogami cables will cost me like $1,000. It's not $1,000, but it's what it feels like. It'll cost you, it'll cost me $200 to get 2 Mogami cables, but if I wait for this and delay my production, it'll cost me $600, whatever that is, right? So you make these decisions really quickly. And so on set, a lot of times the reason I come back to this question is a lot of times we're making decisions that are imperfect because there's a lot of it cost, and you have the space for a certain day and you have the actors for a certain day. And at some point you just have to, you pencils down and do what you were going to do. You will have meetings about why did you get into that position and why didn't you do the proper pre-pro that got you there. But here you are. So other ways to sync your footage. I have Movie Slate on my iPad. When in a pinch, I literally just walk around and show it to all of the cameras. I can type in that time code later, and if all the cameras are running, once they're all running, I can type in that time code and they'll all line up. For long things, this isn't going to work for movies and lots of little bits and pieces and all the things you're doing. But if you're doing an interview and you want to line things up, or you're doing a long capture and you want to line things up, those things will work. We also do a thing called mini slates. When we ask a talent to do a mini slate, you're in the field, you've got 3 cameras, you can't do all this stuff, or you don't want to have a big slate or do anything. You don't have, and this is before it was cost effective to have, all these little LTCs on your camera. We do something just go like this. just do. Obviously, just do this, and we just make sure we could all see their fingers, and they go, and that was enough. It gets back to what Jesse was doing, a little more intentional than blinks, but it was just to have them do this, and we sunk a lot of things in the early aughts with that. Now, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, if you're looking for a robust way to do it, there's this little thing from Deity called the timecode box TC1 kit, and in here's 3 little devices that you can mount on top of your camera. One will be the leader, the rest will be followers, and there's an app. And if you have a camera that can take timecode, then inside this box is a bunch of cables for the industry standards, REDs and LTCs. But there's also a little 3.5 millimeter one, which if you hook it into your headphones, you would just hear like some bleeping, scrambling. It just sounds like digital noise. And you could put that on your left channel. Let's say, for instance, or you could put it on both, but typically what we'd do is throw it on the left channel and then put on the right channel the scratch audio. So if you have a sound mixer, you can have the scratch audio, because what happens with the scratch audio is it just doesn't sound as clean as what we can get into like an F6 or something like that, because a lot of times that's coming off of wireless hop. So you're not doing us sound guys any favors if you in the final production if you use the scratch audio, because it's not proper, and a lot of times it's just a degraded sound. So something to think about is to look at not only this one from Deity, but there's other models from Ambient and some locket boxes and things like that. But it just depends on how much time you want to spend in post messing with this stuff, because once you get those numbers, you can have Final Cut take that audio track from the left channel and turn it into numbers, and then everything's synced up. So that way you're dead on frame accurate every time, and it's a beautiful thing when you have frame accurate footage and you're not having to mess around with the thing. But if you have to get by, you get by with what you got.
Good guy. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris.
I'd also like to defend myself, Guy. My scratch audio is usually wired, not wireless. But another thing that I've had to do, Zach, is you take all the audio file or the video files, you throw them in a timeline. You take all the audio files, you put those in the timeline, and then it becomes like a forensic exercise of going, oh, look, here's 3 little short clips. Oh, and then there's a long one. Okay, oh, this guy, they let the audio run too long. I'm going to move this down. It's a nightmare. But sometimes that's what you have to do. And you can at least find which file goes with what. One of the things that bothers me the most in the field, and I'll try and be a little less angry, is you say, okay, let's roll the house. And one of the camera guys goes, oh, sorry, dude, I've been rolling all along. Stop everything. Is everything stopped? Yes, everything's stopped. Okay. Roll the house now. And because at that point, it might be 10:30 in the morning or 11:30 in the morning. At that point, everything is in sync again. So not perfectly in sync, but it's like everybody started, everybody stopped. Everybody started, everybody stopped. And that just makes the post process go smoother.
And I have to admit, it's so rare for me to use the cameras. so like because of all this stuff, it's very rare for me to use cameras because I have HyperDecks that are all stacked up for every camera. The cameras sometimes get used, but for the most part, and what we really miss are the old HyperDecks that had analog input, because then we would run the program into one, and then oftentimes we take the most important tracks and throw them onto different HyperDecks because they're all connected via Avios. So we have Dante just tapping into all of them and just sending all the audio to them. And when you get going and you start getting addicted to having HyperDecks for your cameras, the cameras just become sensors. They don't, you don't think about how to record to them. I'm learning now how to record back to the cameras for some projects because it's just like, oh, I haven't done that for years. Next question.
Next one's coming in from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. And he asks, the Blackmagic 2110 IP converters and switches look interesting. What are folks saying about them? Would they fit in with the NDI and Netgear 4250s?
Go ahead, Jonas.
At this point, folks are finally getting a little more optimistic. They are finally shipping and getting into people's hands. At the start, there were
the switches
issues.
Are the
switches? I don't know. The converters are.
Oh yeah.
And the decklink cards specifically. Mm-hmm. That being said, at least the configuration utility for the switches is shipped now, which can't be that much longer for the switches to ship. at this point, I wouldn't use the Netgear switches for this specific purpose. They're not like they have NDI, they have Dante, all of those integrations, but they don't have 702110 just yet. A couple things to keep in mind when you're using Blackmagic converters is anything that is over 10 gig on the 2110, so anything that is 4K 30 or higher, depending on how you do it, actually isn't the full raw 2110. That should be 2110-22, which is compressed video. That is using the IP10 codec from Blackmagic. I don't know of any other vendors that have implemented it at this point in time. So you would need to keep that in mind. That being said, people are getting more optimistic with their converters right now. I think the switches are going to be interesting because they allow you to manage your multicast flows more like you would expect it from like a video hub, which a lot of the other switches also do. So if you look at 702110, the multicast often gets put on something called SDN, software-defined networking. So you still, even though it's multicast, you still design to what port it goes, all the IGMP groups, all of that is still controlled. And they are supporting NMOS. So there is hope there spec-wise. I think a lot of the products look pretty interesting. If you keep within the Blackmagic ecosystem, I think you can use it right now. Keep in mind that right now it's more geared and built towards connecting things directly instead of through a switch. And if you connect it through a switch, you do need a 10 gig switch or at least a 5 gig switch. And then you need to make sure that you actually have the backplane capacity and IGMP and boundary clock. There's a whole slew of networking things you then at that point need, especially if you go above a couple devices. How it is with integrating with NDI. There is a proposal for NDI to get NMOS capabilities, which isn't really 702110, but it's a control protocol that goes alongside with that. That is still being worked on, but that would not mean intercompatibility between 702110 and NDI. NDI uses Speed HQ for compressed video, so you get about 100 Mbits per feed. But it is still heavily compressed compared to the 3 gigabits or 12 gigabits, depending on what the signal is you're sending.
Yeah, and Aaron says that Aaron Cothy says that this whole 2110 feels like SDI level A and level B again, and it does. But we have to remember that level B allowed us to start doing that work long before the spec was finished. So those of us who were using level B got to get going. You just had to then know that level B existed, and level A was what all the trucks used.
And to be fair, it's when it first was announced, a lot of people, I made that joke, and yes, that is how it feels, but it's only if you're using more than 10 G. And like it kind of makes sense, because if you would want to do 4K, you then need a 12 gigabit line, and that means now you're at 25 gig SFPs. You're at 25 bit Ethernet. So at that point, it's no longer manageable for most people. So like I get it, and if the cool thing is, if you
what's the bandwidth again of the Blackmagic spec?
It's 10.
10.
So it's like 20% compression. That is relatively easy to do.
Yeah.
And if you look at their code, like it's open source, IP10 is completely open source. You can look at it, you can implement it yourself. It is pretty sane. And 702110, and I think it's 22. I always keep messing those numbers up. I think it's 22 that describes transport of compressed video frames. Right now, the spec does not describe what codec you use to compress them. So like that is something that in the SDP, when you connect this to each other, that you say, but the spec itself does not describe what codec to use. A lot of people use JPEG XS or JPEG 2000, depending on how much money they want to give to the rights holders. But I could also see IP10 getting more and more used. But it's important to know that below 4K 30, it is just 702110 without any special codec, and you can just use it because that is actually uncompressed video.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I talked to someone that was actually on the 2110 committee, and they were glad that Blackmagic is being, doing other things. It's well within the spec. They're not breaking the spec. They're simply implementing something that needed to be done for it to get to a wider market. So I think that it's going to be interesting. The switches, I think, are still pretty far behind. So they're still, I don't think that they're shipping yet, but they might be. I know that they've been working hard at it. But those will make a big difference because they're a fraction of the cost of all the other ones and at the same level. So that's going to make it a lot more open for people to use. If you have questions or you'd like to talk about the questions, ask questions, all those things, you can go use Makana to ask those questions, vote on the questions, chat about the questions. If you don't know how to get to Makana, you can go to officehours.global/join. Fill that out, and you'll start getting emails tomorrow, and it'll give you links to Discord and to Makana and all those other things. All right, next question.
Aaron Cody in St. Louis, Missouri says, I'm tired of having multiple monitors, camera, teleprompter, shotgun mic, etc. sitting on my desk. It's time to move to a more robust solution. Any tips, brands, or systems, perhaps something independent from the desk to reduce the camera shake?
I'll go, Jason.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. C-stands. C-stands, my friend, are your best friend. This is my camera, and it's on rails, and it's just a big C-stand that's holding the thing up. Here it is shown with a Fenwick Tallmaker, but this is a standard lighting rig, and you can get lots of these, and they can be compacted, and they can go wherever they end up needing to go in order to support what you need. I've found that it's pretty great. You can jump around, and there's no camera shake.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Our North Star is if you don't touch it, it doesn't need to be on the desk permanently. So keyboards, go on the desk. The computers, get off the desk kind of thing.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'm using a slew of stuff from Triad Orbit. I don't have a way to pull it up right now, but the integration of all these different wheeled systems as well as clamps and hooks. So my teleprompter has the ability to be moved around up and down, left to right, side to side, positioned anywhere in the room, but also I can clamp on any kind of quarter 20. I could put on a shelf. You go through their website, you would be amazed at what you can hook on. I mean, you can put lights, you could put 5 microphones if you wanted on these stands. They're really heavy duty, so they're expensive though. We're expensive friends, and you'll be dropping about $1,000 if you go with this solution. It's pretty pricey.
Next question.
Next one in from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas asks, YouTube TV will increase from US $72.99 a month to $82.99 a month in 2025. Has the streaming industry lost its value proposition?
I don't know what that value proposition is that you're referring to, but YouTube TV is pretty awesome. I have it. It is so much better. I could never go back to cable. I could never go back to, I have to say that, I get that it's a little bit more money, and for some people that'll be too much. But it is the ability to, from a work perspective, I record probably 150 shows. And every time I want to think about super sources or lower thirds or other things, I just kind of peruse all of that stuff and pull down what I need to take a look at, things and break things down. I'm also, I pay more than that because I have the NFL ticket. so on top of that, I have a lot of those other bits and pieces. I feel like while YouTube continues to get more expensive, I feel like a lot of the other streamers are getting more expensive. They're less money, but I don't see any extra value. And so I'm looking at actually dropping some of those. Like right now, Disney and Max are kind of on the edge of me going, I don't really go to these very much anymore. Why am I here? I think they don't have a lot of value proposition for YouTube. YouTube and YouTube TV are 95% of what I watch, and Apple TV and Prime are probably the other 5. So I don't know, I think that there's so many channels and so much available to you, and you don't have to watch it right now. And you can say, and it's so convenient the way that the recording works. And I just feel like it's really well done. Go ahead, Chris.
I wish Disney and Disney and Hulu, those are the ones that are linked together.
Yeah.
I wish they weren't, because I would get rid of one of them. And I wouldn't get rid of Max, because Max has all the gold shows, and those are awesome.
Yeah, I mean, what's keeping me on Max right now is Hard Knocks, because it's the AFC, and I get to watch Mike Tomlin be Mike Tomlin. Like I watch press releases I press things with Mike Tomlin. I love listening to the guy talk, and so the more I can get to that, so I'll hang on at least through the end of Hard Knocks. Next question.
Next one in from Pedro G. Gonzalez III in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And he asks, what are your tips for shipping gear like PA speakers across the country? Don't need fast shipping, just reliable and cheap.
Go ahead, Craig.
I don't know specifically in the States carriers, but the one thing I would say would be air ride. Anything you're shipping like that, make sure it's an air ride truck that's going to take it so your stuff doesn't get rattled out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the cheapest ways. I mean, a lot of times we're using FedEx Ground. I mean, that's kind of our slowest way of getting from one place to the other. It depends on how many PA speakers too. So if you're talking about 2, that's one thing. If you're talking about 30, that's a whole nother problem. And it does get to a point where I used to have a truck, or we used to rent trucks, and we used to put them on stuff, and that might be the most reliable if you have enough gear. So it depends on what how many that you're doing. But right, for us, typically when we're trying to slow boat something, it's FedEx Ground, and if it's going across the country, it takes 5 days. If it's California, it's almost overnight. So it just depends. Next question.
Francis Fry in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Alex, can you describe when and how you use an Apple TV with an ATEM switcher?
Yeah, so I have a Apple TV connected to my ATEM switcher right now. Let's see if I can pull it up here real quickly here. So I'm always scared of doing this like live. So just give me a second here. Let me, let's see here. So basically the Apple TV becomes a way that we connect, hold on, let me turn on my Wi-Fi. I was on flight yesterday, so I was on airplane mode still. So no wonder I've not been getting any calls. We use this for iPads and phones, particularly iPads in studios. So we have a lot of times where we have guests that are on studios, and we don't want to figure out how to plug into their iPad and what it's going to look like or whatever. We simply just have an Apple TV that's underneath the desk, and we've mounted them underneath the desk, and it's just sitting there. And we just say, hey, just mirror to, you'll see, and it'll say like Studio Connect, or it'll say Studio Apple TV or Studio ATV, and then they just connect to that, and it immediately pops up. And so what you're looking at here, if this all, let's see here. So like what you're seeing here, trying to make sure I don't have any. So this is my phone, and I'm not, as you can see, I'm not connected to anything. Like I'm just sitting there just sharing it. And so it's a really easy way. And I primarily use it when we want to integrate folks and make it really easy for them. Again, we're throwing it like a foot, like it's connected over that. And we've had almost zero. I mean, I can't remember a time when we ever had a problem with it, using it. And I've used it since AirPlay existed, and so the other thing I use it for is in our cooking stuff. When we've done cooking, the little cooking behind the scenes, we've used it as a wireless camera. Again, I don't know if I would do this in a production, like a paid production, but when we're doing the stuff as an experiment, as a thought experiment, I used for the cooking, I had 4 cameras, and one of them was a Blackmagic camera. The other one at the time, I probably used the Sony now for that specific thing because of the autofocus and everything else. That's on me. So that's my like waist up shot of me in the kitchen. And then I had another camera that was on the cutting board, and that was an old iPhone that I had laying around. And then I had another one that was an old iPhone laying around. Those are HDMI. Those are going into the switcher, and that one's on the stove, right? So we would have those close-ups on the cutting board, close-ups on work area, close-ups on the stove where I want to show that what I'm cooking. And then the last one was kind of this. I would have an Apple TV connected to the switcher, and that was just using the. I think at the time I was just using the one of the camera apps to do it. And basically what I would do is that was like my little walk around, and I could just show you. So if there was something that those three cameras couldn't hit, I could just grab it and show it. So again, I have a lot of wireless stuff. I mean, I have a Teradek Ranger right here. If I'm doing production, we're going to probably use something more robust. But for little things like this, or at your desk, or little cooking things or whatever, it works really well to tie those together. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I have a slightly different use case for this type of tool. I do a training session where I've got a room full of 5 to 10 people, all on Macs, that I'm teaching a particular Apple-based product. And we're all in that hardwired networked because it's a Dante-based class. I use the Apple TV as a way for any of the students to be able to share their screen to the class on the large projector or screen as part of the demonstration. So that's just an easy way for me to go from having my slide deck screen or my application screen or any of the participant screens show up.
And go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just one thing to add, and I'm not sure if Alex said it or not, but to reduce your latency, of course, you're always going to be into Ethernet. Anytime you do something like this, you don't go Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi. The only Wi-Fi Alex is talking about is the throw from the phone, not to the Apple TV.
Next question.
Next one in from Zach Stallsmith, and he asks, what are best practices for capturing a crowd in the semi-dark that would mostly be using cell phone lights or only have ambient lighting around the venue?
Go ahead, Jesse.
Let it be dark. A lot of times people want to push the crowd shots to, like from 400 ISO to 6400, and it ends up being grainy and washed out and flat. See if you can coordinate moments with the band to have everybody raise their phones and have the lights on at the same time so that you don't have to push it and you can still get good emotional shots. But there's a real cost to pushing the gain in post-production, and it takes me right out of the experience when I'm watching concert footage and it goes to the audience and looks like that.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Like Jesse said, think about what are you trying to tell? What is part of the story you're trying to tell? Are you trying to tell the experience? Then just leave it dark. Like, think about what is the use case there. Maybe you want to make a statement about how many people use their phones. Then leave it even darker. So every time someone opens up their phones, you see their whole face illuminated. Take a camera and test it with it. Some cameras do a lot better with darkness than others. A lot of them just noise you up. So take a camera that you tested for it and try to keep it stable. That also helps if you need to break a rule. Like often we break rules like the 180-degree shutter rule, where then you have different motion blur. But it's an audience sitting. If it's an audience sitting, it probably doesn't matter. But then you would want it locked off. So keep that in mind.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I've done some of these shows where we have really long box lenses and we're actually on the stage and we have, comms on, and we'll have a wide shot so the director can see somebody that they want us to reach out to. And so they have, a bank of monitors and they can see when we're getting up on that person, and they'll say, now creep zoom in on Sharon, second row, purple shirt. And, it's up to us to be on the ball and get it. The other thing is PTZ cameras with large sensors like the UE150, UE160s, the Sony H800, some of these with the huge chips, even with the gain cranked up, can see, I don't want to say in darkness, but the grain that you're used to seeing on some of these lower end PTZs or lower end cameras just goes away when you shift over to something that costs $12,000 to $15,000. You'd be amazed at what money can buy. But otherwise, we've used these Grass Valley cameras they don't record. They're just triax, or they're just fiber all the way back to the switcher, and it looks amazing because it's so clean.
Yeah, and if you really want to take it to the nth degree, these are this is the Canon ME20. and I use these on very low light. We've used these in broadcasts where we couldn't see in front of us. So and it picking up an image that we can use. It's 4 million ISO is where it goes up to. Now, I will say the last 3 million ISO is not very viewable. so it's pretty grainy. But still, the first million ISO and like a 500,000 ISO is pretty clean. And it's what they did is they have a full-size sensor, a full-frame sensor. Now, the ME200 is a Super 35 sensor. This is a full-frame sensor, but it's only 1080p. So it's giant sensor sites. And that makes it's even bigger than the ones that Sony has or anybody else has that are there, although potentially not the new. There's a new one coming out in the future. But anyway, but Canon, so they've kind of locked into this. We've used these in theaters where I can tell people what color their bracelet is. They don't know what color their bracelet is, and we've lit them by literally putting things on screens, like like we can put a bright object on a screen and we can light the whole audience with it, so those are the high end ones. They're 20,000 each. You can rent them for about $1,500 a day from Borrow Lenses. I think they have one because I feel like I get the same one every single time we rent it. So anyway, those are other things to kind of think about there. Quick reminder: if you want to ask questions and you don't want to log into anything or anything else, you can just go to askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global. You can use that little QR code if you feel like it, but you can also just type in askofficehours.global. Ask that question. Try to keep it succinct and straightforward, and we'll throw it in the next couple of days. Next question.
Francis Fry in Cambridge asks, for a video podcast with guests and hosts in different locations, we want to record locally and then in post have a multi-camera edit. My thought was that if everything had the same time code, this would be possible. Reaction?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Yes, if you have the same time code, that is totally possible. Scientifically, like you can use GPS and then you have it all locked together. What I would do is make sure that you have, like I said, an ISO that is the gallery with the max audio that you then can sync to. And one of the things you also want to keep in mind is if there is differences in latency between those people, you might need to adjust how you sync those so it fits together well. Because if, for example, we would do this with office hours, I am 100, 200, 250 milliseconds out from the rest. And if you would just sync it all together, now you had a really bad experience because it isn't like they had the conversation. And you might have people interrupting each other even more. So I would, for us, if we do it in the cloud, I choose a region that is closest to the center of the conversation, and that is just defined as most of the people are going to be closest to that. So it represents the experience that most people have had closest. But that, yeah, you can totally just like get a GPS clock and do it that way. But keep in mind that the offset between people of the medium that you use to have the conversation is still something to keep in mind.
Go ahead, Jesse.
But if you are going to do it, the local recordings, I would make sure that you have the truth and the relative truth. So you'd have one file that is the actual truth that you want to refer to, and then have everybody on the same external recorder. You don't want people recording to their hard drives or doing a screen scrape or something like that. Frames can be lost, frames can be picked up. You can lose sync over time that way. So you want to have an external device and the same external device at each location, have them record their feeds and then collect those files and have all your relative truth matched up to that one true truth.
Go ahead, Chris.
So, Francis, I think it's going to be relatively simple because what you're going to see is you're going to see like me talking, and then when I'm listening to you, there's going to be a gap in my audio. You could usually just line those things up visually. It's not that hard. Also, I realize you might be trying to do like ultra super amazing quality. I would highly recommend you just use Riverside for this. You'll get a local recording. You take those files. There's a feature called download aligned something or other. I don't know. Basically, just slam it up against the left wall of your timeline. Everything's in sync. Done.
Yeah, and we've done some higher end ones where we use local cameras for everything. So we send out those cameras to everyone, and we record them all so that and they're being recorded at 6K. I mean, these have been 6K cameras that we, or Blackmagic 6Ks that we were using at the time. And obviously it gives us, we're recording in log at 6K, raw. So Blackmagic Raw for those, and then we recompile those back into shows. And those they take a little bit of work. They do look a lot better than Riverside's going to be able to generate from that process, because we now have full control over those. So Riverside is a good example. We use Riverside and other things for Squadcast and Riverside to do those double end recordings, and that's a good in between. But if you're, I get the impression from Francis's question that this is an attempt to really go all the way, to have these really high end cameras at every location with good mics. And I think that I think that what you're looking for are probably, you can use the GPS timecode, but you're going to end up, having to fiddle with it because of all the latency that Jonas is talking about. So there's still going to be some, it's not going to be like, oh, I threw it all in and it all lined up. You're going to end up wanting to keep the audio married with the video, and you're going to be kind of nudging everything back and forth together. It's not going to feel like a pure multicam as you put it together, because if you do that, the latency will become problematic if you're doing local records for everything. Next question.
Next one in from Tony Mobley Noonan, and he asked, not able to access the SORA application with the Plus ChatGPT subscription. Is there an ETA?
I don't know. I haven't. I keep on going, I got to get to it, and I haven't looked for it yet or tried to get to it yet. But it was on my weekend list of things to try to get working, but I haven't done it yet. Go, Jonas.
Just make sure you don't happen to be in Europe or use a VPN to Europe. And I think they're rolling it out slowly, and you should get it within a month for the US.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Alex, you mentioned the cost of Mogami cables. What cable brand do you prefer for day-to-day use?
The Mogami is a pretty popular one. Something that uses Neutrik connectors and star quad cable is what you're looking for. like it's anybody who does those two things. Those are the things I'm looking for: a star quad cable and Mogami, or not Mogami, but Neutrik termination are the things that we're looking for. A lot of times those have been us, so, we bought Star Quad at 1,000 feet at a time, buy a bunch of Neutrik connectors. You have people sitting around with soldering irons and putting things together. It also helps when you're trying to do certain cut. It does mean that you end up with a lot of cables that are 32 feet long because that's what we needed for what we built it for. So those are the things that but if you're going to buy something at a store and you want it to just work, I will admit that, we've bought thousands of dollars of Mogami cables, because that's what we needed something right now. And I'm sending an intern over to Guitar Center, and I can't have them try to figure this out. And I don't want a bunch of hosers to come back. So anyway, so I just say, just go out and buy. I sent my wife one time, she bought $3,200 of Mogami cables for a show where we were just way short in that process. So it can happen there, but that's how we approach it. Mickey said Mogami, Canary, Belden are all good analog cables for him. Quick reminder, if you want to support what we do, if you really like Office Hours and you want to support us, there's a couple different ways that you can do that. One is make sure to like and subscribe this channel, our YouTube channel, or go to our YouTube channel if you haven't. I see that some people have supported it by buying shirts, and a couple of them have them here.
They're coming, Alex. They're
starting
here.
to show up. The shirts are starting to show up. That has made a huge difference for us, by the way. I think we're working on hats next, so we'll give you things that you can buy. You can also donate by just going to officehours.global/donate. Just and donate either regularly or in one lump sum if you like. That whole $10, you throw it in. So that's another way to do it. You can also volunteer. If you go to officehours.global/volunteer, you can become part of this group and be part of the village that makes this happen every single day. Let's go ahead and jump into the next question.
Next question is Angelo Jack, Brooklyn, New York, and he asks, can the panel suggest any hardware VPN boxes that one can set up on a local network, then distribute to remote locations to easily control macOS devices where those folks on site have no technical skills?
Go ahead, Jonas.
There's a couple things to consider here. If you just want to make your life easy, just buy a bunch of Peplink products. I've never had a so easy time connecting two sites together than just being like, and you should be connected. If you have any issues with port forwarding, they give you like a terabyte of bandwidth through one of their SpeedFusion Connect relays. So you just say, I want to relay through this country. That location. Alternative, if you are a little more cost conscious, I would set up a WireGuard tunnel somewhere and then use GLI Net Mango, and then you can tie it together with that as well. One of the things with that is you need to test it more, and you don't have remote control over that. So you can't just make changes to that VPN config on site. That's where the peplinks really shine. And there's like really cheap peplinks now as well that can do this. And you can set them up in drop-in mode where it just is transparent. It takes in the IP address, gives it out to the next device as well. So it's fairly transparent to do.
Next question.
Peter Belbin in Houston, Texas asks, anyone have any good, bad experience with using Owncast for small-scale video streaming needs? And he's got a link there to owncast.online. I
don't have any experience with them. I don't even know what they do, other than I'm guessing streaming. so you might have hit a blind spot for us. So we'll take a look. Try to take a look at it. No, next question.
David Hamilton in Detroit, Michigan asks, can you recommend a standalone app that will batch process and normalize audio files, keeping the relative gain within each file consistent? The one I'm using changes gain within each file while normalizing, and this does not work for me. Thanks.
Go ahead, Craig.
I use a product called Twisted Wave. When I bought that app, it was a flat-out purchase. They've gone to subscription, which doesn't really excite me. It's a lot more expensive, but you can set up a lot of detailed batch processing functions with it. Also, we'll do an analyze of an entire file to give you all the details of maximum, peak, RMS, all that.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I think I can get you across the finish line in Resolve. This is what we use for exactly what you're talking about. Select all your audio files, right-click, normalize audio levels. Then you can pick relative or independent. Independent means that each file is analyzed on its own. Relative means that it will take the maximum from all the files and balance everything so it's the same amount of gain across all files. Your choice there. Once you're done, you go over to deliver and individual clips instead of single clips, turn off video, export audio, but make sure you switch it over to WAV. You don't want to export it as a QuickTime file, and that should get you across the finish line. Good luck.
Yeah, if I'm doing something batch, or for some reason I'm trying to pull that together, I generally try to be very conservative so that I leave a lot of headroom for it, and then I'll make fine adjustments. But in general, I try to do most stuff by hand to make sure that it does sound the way I want it to sound. Mickey also said you can look at new gen audio. AMB is another thing that Mickey recommends. Next question.
Jack Cannon, Phoenix, Arizona asks, working on a documentary, it's really tempting to leave the mics rolling because of the unrepeatable moments that you can capture. How often do we need to stop mics to avoid sync issues?
Go, Jesse.
Absolutely leave your mics rolling. If you can afford to, leave your cameras rolling as well. We do exactly that. And we do cuts like every time we think of it. Try not to go more than an hour if it's just this continuous roll. And the other thing is to have an assistant taking notes of if there's anything good in that block of time or if it's all useless and you want to get rid of it.
Yeah, and it's sometimes we also do things where we have something rolling all the time, and other things are stopping and starting. So, a lot of times we have for when we're working on stuff like this, we would leave something running, leave a recorder running. I usually have multiple recorders working on things, and one of them just sitting there running the whole time, and then the other ones are stopping and starting the way we want to do production, just in case we lose that. Now, Mickey said that for many unscripted shows, we just roll from call time to wrap. so that's a long run for everything, but that could definitely make sense for you. He said make sure that all the recorders have extremely accurate clocks and word clocks. And again, this gets back, and if you don't have those, make sure that you're recording audio to the cameras as well as to if there's any kind of drift or anything else that ends up happening over time. What you want to do is make sure that the audio is going into the cameras as well as, and that's the biggest mistake we find people make is that they allow the cameras not to get audio and then they don't, it's very hard for them to figure out what happened. And especially if you haven't done a lot of time code, it's worth making sure that you're ready to do that so that you can sync it back up properly. And now we're going to do something we haven't done for a little while, which is we're going to jump into a second hour. And now I'm going to sit here. But I ended too soon.
On this second